Hi, boys and girls, it's Miss Rossi. I know all of our favorite projects when we are in school are our clay projects. So today I'm going to show you how you can make your own clay at home. So this is called a salt dough. A salt dough needs three things. It needs salt, flour, and water. So I have all of those ingredients laid out. You might need to ask your parents for help measuring or getting your ingredients. So check with them before you start taking things from the kitchen. But you're going to need a quarter cup of salt, a half a cup of flour, and a quarter cup of water. Then you're going to need a bowl where you can mix your ingredients in to make our dough. Now, a salt dough is a type of air dry clay. With air dry clay, you can leave it out once you make your sculpture in the air to dry overnight. It might take a day or two. You might have to flip it so both sides can get fully dry. And it will harden just like clay does when we're at school. Or you can actually bake it in the oven when you're done using it. So you'll definitely want to ask your parents for help if you want to bake yours so it will harden much faster. If you want to put yours in the oven, it will dry a lot quicker. So you'd have to preheat your oven to around 250 degrees and then place your dough on a baking sheet and allow it to harden in the oven for around 2 hours. Once it's out of the oven, you're going to want to let it cool before you try and start painting it. If you're going to use an oven to dry out your clay, make sure you have your parent or somebody who's older there to help you so you don't get hurt. But this can dry in the air, so you do not need to use your oven. What I'm going to show you today is going to be a small batch of air dry clay. If you want to make a larger batch because you want to make a larger sculpture or a larger ornament, then you would just double the ingredients. So instead of a quarter cup of salt, you would use a half a cup of salt. Instead of a half a cup of flour, you would use a full cup of flour. And instead of a quarter cup of water, you would use a half a cup of water. All right, and you can keep doubling those ingredients and making a bigger batch for whatever you need. So what we're going to do first is we are going to add our flour to our bowl. And then I am going to add my salt to my bowl. And I can also do this with different kinds of flour. I have corn flour here that will also work. It's just going to be a little bit of a different color. But I'll show you that after we do this one if you need a gluten-free option. So I'm just going to mix around my salt and my flour together. And once I like the way that those are mixed, I'm going to mix in my water. So I have my quarter cup of water here. And I can start to mix those together, and I'm going to start to see my dough form. Now it might get tricky to start to mix with my fork, so I'm going to start kneading my dough with my hands, which means I'm going to mix it together kind of with my hands, folding it over on my table. Now it's starting to get a little tough for me to mix, so I think I'm ready to start kneading it. So I'm going to dump this out onto my table. Get all the extra flour out of there. Going to get the dough off of my fork. And now I can start to mix it together on my table. So I just want to fold these ingredients together. Your dough might still be a little sticky. See, I have a little bit of extra flour and salt left on my table, so I'm just going to press that into my dough, and I'm folding it over and pushing down to knead my dough to make sure all of the flour and salt gets blended together with that water. And now I'm just going to knead my dough together for a few minutes so I know it's nice and smooth. I don't really want it to be sticky. I don't want it to leave any extra clay on my hands while I'm making whatever kind of sculpture I want. So if you think yours is a little too wet or a little too sticky, you can always add a little bit more flour or a little bit more salt, but it should be good. Mine feels pretty good. It's not leaving a lot of mess on my table, and it's also not really sticking to my hands too much. And now what I'm getting is kind of like a Play-Doh feeling, or like Model Magic almost. It's still very soft and squishy. It can pull apart, it can stick back together, but it's not super wet and super messy like our clay is at school. I like to let my dough rest for a little bit if I still think it's too sticky and it's leaving too much on my hands. If I let it sit for around 10 to 20 minutes, it will dry out a little bit more and it's going to be a lot easier to work with. You can check on it after like 5 minutes and see if you think it's going to be good and it's not going to leave too much of a mess. But you should be able to make things like handprints in your dough. You can break it into little pieces and turn it into a sculpture if you want to make like an animal or a decoration. You can do that also. So I'm going to put that dough aside. I cleaned out my workstation and I am going to make my gluten-free dough. I'm going to use the same measurements that I had before. So I have my 1/4 cup of salt. I have a 1/2 cup of corn flour this time. If you have a different kind of gluten-free flour, you can use that also. And then I also have a 1/4 cup of water. I'm going to do the same thing where I'm going to take my flour, dump that in my bowl, make sure it all gets in there. And I'm going to take my salt, dump that in as well. And I'm going to mix those together. And I'm going to do the same process that I did to make my first dough. Now I have my gluten-free dough that I made with my corn flour. It is not going to be as stretchy as my dough that I made with my regular flour because corn flour is a little bit drier. It doesn't have the same type of elastic qualities or the same stretchy qualities as regular flour does. It's still going to make you the same kind of air dry clay. It's going to still work the same. It just might get a few more cracks in it, so you'll just have to smooth those out with your finger like we do at school when we're smoothing out our clay before it goes in the kiln. But it should work the same. This one is definitely not as sticky as my flour dough that I made, which is really nice, so it's not making as much of a mess. And I found it a lot easier to shape it and mix it in my hands instead of kneading it on the table. I'm going to let both of these doughs that I made sit out for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to come back to them and use them to make a sculpture.
A few moments later.
I let both of my doughs rest for probably not even 10 minutes. And my flour dough is already a lot less sticky, so it's not leaving any residue on my fingers as I'm touching it. It still feels a little sticky when I touch it, but it's not leaving any clay left over on my hands or on the table as I'm using it, which is nice. And with my gluten-free dough, it is still kind of like that same consistency. It's still a lot firmer. It's a little bit more crumbly, but that is okay. I can still use it the same. So I think I'm going to start with my corn dough, and with both of my doughs, I think I'm just going to make a rainbow by rolling coils and attaching them together. I'm going to start by separating my dough into 6 different pieces for the 6 colors of the rainbow. If I have any dough left over, maybe I'll put some clouds at the edges. Now you can turn your doughs into whatever you would like. The more that I worked with my flour dough, the stickier it got and it started to leave a lot of residue on my hands. I would definitely recommend leaving it out for more than 5 minutes so it can harden up a little bit before you start using it, because it is going to get a little bit sticky. You are also going to want to make whatever you're making on maybe like a paper plate or a regular plate so you can let it dry on that surface, because if I try and pick this up and move it right now, it's going to fall apart. I want to make sure that I'm making my sculpture on a surface that I can leave it on for a while so it can dry there. So I hope you guys have a lot of fun making different kinds of things at home, whether those are animals, whether they are handprints or decorations or fake food. So be sure to send me pictures of whatever you make. I would love to see it. Have fun and get creative. Bye!